And on Rule 10 of White Magic, Rule 10 is really the longest rule. There's a lot of good stuff in there. He's been talking about controlling the astral body, and one of the ways to do that, he says, is with words of power, where the person can command energies themselves. But then he says that esoteric schools begin with the most important ingredient is to the control of the astral body. And he says in past times, the student had to memorize and practice 3 particular rules after he had made some real growth in the manifestation of harmlessness. We'll go over these 3 rules briefly. Rule number 1, he says, enter into thy brother's heart and see his woe. Then speak. Let words spoken convey to him the potent force he needs to loose his chains. Yet loose them not thyself. Thine work is to speak with understanding. The force received by him will aid him in his work. There's a lot of meat on that rule number 1. Enter to thy brother's heart and see his woe. And then speak the words he needs to help him, free him from his problems. So that's certainly a work that disciples have to have, and that's one of the things we can do. And as a group, for instance, right now, somebody with a big problem is Angel with her son just had a serious accident. So it's important that we have empathy and understand what she's going through and what different members of the group are going through when these happen, and do what we can to alleviate those problems. Okay, the second rule, he said, enter into thy brother's mind and read his thoughts, but only when thy thoughts are pure. Then think, let the thoughts thus created enter thy brother's mind and blend with his, yet keep detached thyself, for none have the right to sway a brother's mind. The only right there is will make him say, he loves, he standeth by, he knows, he thinks with me, and I am strong to do the right. Learn thus to speak, learn thus to think. Okay. A lot of meat in there also. Enter thy brother's mind and read his thoughts, but only when thy thoughts are pure. Why is the purity of your own thoughts important when reading your brother's mind? What do you think that's the case? Do you think if your thoughts are not pure, you maybe read his intentions incorrectly?
You have your own motives and intentions otherwise.
Right. You ever notice that when somebody criticizes you, they're often a lot more guilty of the problem than you are yourself? Do you ever notice that?
Yes.
Yeah. People see their own thoughts reflected in them, especially in their negative thoughts. So if they're really judging you negatively, it's often a reflection of what's already in themselves. So he stresses here, only read your brother's thoughts when your thoughts are pure. And I think he says this because you can only see your brother's thoughts correctly, or sisters, of course, when yours are pure, because otherwise if you're negative yourself, you'll not read him correctly. You'll not understand him. You won't understand what he's going through. And so he says, let the thoughts thus created enter thy brother's mind and blend with his. So he says this, but then he tells us that it's wrong to sway your brother's mind. So, and this is what the masters do with us. They don't force us. They let they'll send a certain thought your direction, the master's will, or maybe your soul will. A lot of thoughts that enters into a disciple's mind are not his original thoughts, but are planted there by either your own soul or by a higher life. And they just let them plant. And then when the thought is there, it's not forced upon us. It's just planted. And you may just have a thought occur to you, but it's entirely up to your free will whether you will follow that thought or not. And now the masters have the ability to almost impose it upon you, but they don't do that. On the other hand, the dark brothers have no qualms about doing that. So if they have a disciple they're working with, they will actually try to control them. And so that's a difference between the light and the dark. It's always boils down to freedom. The those who work on the side of the light always allow maximum freedom, and those on the side of the dark, the end justifies the means in their mind. So all they care about is making things happen. That's why, according to DK, the dark side makes, in the beginning, will always make faster progress, but in the end, the light side has longer lasting results because they're done through free will. Rule number 3, blend with thy brother's soul and know him as he is. Only upon the plane of the soul can this be done. Elsewhere, the blending feeds the fuel of his lower life. Then focus on the plan. Thus will he see the part that he had and you and all men play. Thus will he enter into life and know the work accomplished. And this is the highest aspect of the highest rule, is first of all, you blend with his heart, then his mind, and then his soul. When you blend with the soul, since all souls are really one and they're all connected, when you blend with your brother's soul, you see from a higher angle of vision, not just through his eyes, but through the plan. You get every person is a piece of the great plan. And when you blend with another person's soul, you can see the part of the plan that both you and he will play together. So those are three rules that in the past the teachers of the race have used with their students. A note appended to these three rules says this: these three energies of speech, of thought, and of purpose, when wielded with understanding by the cella or the student, and blended with the awakening forces of his brother whom he seeks to aid, are the three energies with which all adepts work. So these three rules here are kind of guidelines for how the side of light, the brotherhood of light, works compared to maybe the dark brothers. But they all work through the principle of freedom. They work through influencing the heart, the mind, and then bringing down the revelation from the soul, from the person's own soul. In other words, the end result of any servant working with another to bring them forward in the path, the end result is soul contact together so that they can feel the same revelation together as to the next step to be taken. Okay, any question on that before we move ahead? The next section in this rule is, he calls it the present and the future. And he enlarges on emanations from what he called the heart of the sun. He says what's called the heart of the sun corresponds to the love of God. And he says this cannot be understood until the heart center is open. Okay, the difference between the heart, there's a big difference between the heart and the solar plexus energy. We talked about that a little bit last week. But he says the heart will lead us back to the Father's house, whereas the solar plexus, if we follow the lower desires, it just keeps us here in the wheel of rebirth. And we'll go along and we'll do some good things, and then all of a sudden we maybe have a major problem. Maybe the person's has a financial disaster, or his wife leaves him, some loved one dies, and all of a sudden he gets the feeling nature becomes so stimulated that he gets caught up in it again, and it puts his whole attention, and then he backtracks for a while. And this is one of the problems we have with emotional disasters that happen in our life, and they happen to us all. And in easy times, it's kind of easy to keep your mind at peace and center yourself in the direction of the heart, at least. But then sometimes something totally unexpected will happen, and we'll think life is unfair, and we'll start getting that solar plexus dominating again. So the disciple goes back and forth. He'll make a step in centering on the pure heart energies, and then he'll backtrack for a while, and then he'll go ahead again, and then eventually reaches a point where nothing can sway him away from the pure heart energies and the pure higher mind. And that's where we all want to be, where nothing can distract us, no matter what happens on the outward world. And that's easy to say, but difficult to accomplish. And we can understand anyone that's affected by that. Each disciple needs to be a stabilizing point to enhance his surroundings. The disciple should not see astral forces as something to fight against or resist, but to make contact with a higher self, keep it stable and steady, and to be in such a direct alignment that the force and power of the soul may be poured upon to the three lower bodies. And the disciple must merge himself toward the good of all those contacted. And this is an important point for the disciple to learn, not only to not be distracted by the negative forces, but to always make a step that is for the good of the whole rather than just the good of the self. And again, we get all kinds of temptations to revert us back to the self. We get all kinds of temptations to revert us back to the solar plexus energy. But then we also get all kinds of temptations to take us back to concentrating on the self. There's moments in every aspirant's life where he's thinking of the good of humanity and wants to be a servant and wants to be agent of light, and then he'll encounter something that maybe he gets ill, and he has a heart attack, or something goes on that, boy, that puts all your attention on yourself all of a sudden. You're not even thinking anybody else for a while if you have an accident or something. And so this is we have all kinds of difficulties in life, and like we were talking about earlier, in this earth school that we're in, it's very well made to make it difficult to escape the illusion completely, because we think we're on safe ground, and then something will happen to pull the rug out from under our feet, so to speak, and then we have to climb out of the pit again back into the light of day. And it's a struggle for everybody. And there's one thing that's somewhat encouraging, and that is we're all in the same boat together. All of us have to do that, and so whatever we're going through, other people have gone through and are going through, and in a weird sort of way, that's a little comforting to know that you're not alone. Because the worst thing, this is what makes the dark night supposedly so difficult for everybody, is when people go through a dark night of sorts, it feels like they're the only one in the universe that's ever gone through anything like this. But in reality, they're not. But it seems like it when the person's going through it. It's, their neighbors aren't talking about any dark night. Their friends aren't talking about what they're going through. It seemed like they've gone through it all alone. And this is what happens to every disciple. He goes through certain things that he feels that nobody else has ever experienced in the whole universe until he experienced it. And in a way that's true, and in a way it's not true. In a way it's true is that every person's life is unique. Edward's life here is just totally different than any other life that's ever been lived, and so is Kenny, and so is Stacy. But on the other hand, the experiences, the essence of the experiences are the same for us all. When we take a certain step, we can be comforted in the fact that other people have already taken that step, and everybody else will take that step if they haven't. So there's no reason for the disciple, if he sees correctly, there's no reason for him to feel completely alone, because he's never alone. Aloneness is an illusion, because we're always connected to every other soul, and we're in this together a lot more than it seems like as we kind of struggle along in our lives. It says the disciple must find points of agreement between the two sides in turbulent times like these. And he talks about the turbulent time. Now, he wrote this shortly before World War II, and he kept talking about the turbulent times that he was in. I don't know if he realized how much more turbulent it was going to get. But the way he describes it before World War II, there sounds like still sounds like our day. We're still in a very turbulent time. But he says learning comes and goes, and if successful in one cycle, the power to progress will be greater in the next. And so in turbulent times, if we can solve the turbulent times, it will give us greater power to be successful in the future. Well, we went through his turbulent times in World War II and everything after, and we're still have a lot of turbulence, but it's kind of we have a different turbulence now than we've ever had before. So hopefully we will solve this turbulation we're going through and move to a higher level one. He says, if occupation with mundane affairs is necessitated, and such periods come in every life cycle, then attention should be concentrated on these details, and the higher contact may be temporarily unrealized. Establishing and maintaining consciousness on each plane is essential. So in other words, what he's saying here is a disciple, he sometimes reaches a point to where you just got to take care of everyday living and forego maybe some of the things you want to learn and do as a servant of light. Sometimes you have to put that on hold to take care of everyday living. And he's quite practical about this. He tells us that this is a big mistake many disciples make, is they forego responsibilities they have to their family, friends, their job, taking care of themselves. Some of them just dump it all and expect other people to take care of them while they study metaphysical books or whatever, or spiritual books, or go on the spiritual path. He says, the disciple needs to take care of himself, take care of things. And Paul was a good example of that. He was a tent maker, and Paul kept saying how he not only provided for himself, but he made enough money to provide for other disciples in the work. And so he was a really good example of somebody that just took care of ordinary details of life while still being a servant, and that is difficult, and it's particularly difficult if you've got a certain amount of light and you want to share it, and you find you got to take care of business and make a living. It's very difficult. Now, Jesus says you cannot serve God and mammon, so this makes it difficult. So sometimes if you really have to take care of details, sometimes you just got to concentrate on mammon for a while until you get in a situation where you can focus more on the spiritual work. But I found overall that what I've tried to do when I've had to work long hours to make a living is always have a little bit of time each day to feed the spiritual side. Spend a little time reading, or you can also listen to audiobooks these days on iPod, which makes good use of your time. So you can always find a little time to dedicate to the spiritual life, even if you have to work hard to make a living. He says, in times of chaos, as we have now. No, when he says now, that's back in the 1930s. So, but it still really applies today. In the time of chaos, as we have now, the disciple must remain poised and steady. Though to you the whole situation may seem clouded and the horizon darkened by storms, boy, doesn't that sound like today? He says, bear in mind that when the disturbance is general, as now, and the whole area involved, then the end is near. In nature, a general electric storm serves to clear the atmosphere and ushers in a period of sunshine and more grateful living conditions. So if we apply that to today, we got lots of storms today with the especially in politics, both political sides are attacking each other like crazy. He says, this is a sign that the end is near. It's an interesting way to look at it. So in other words, once these two sides reach a crescendo, it's a sign that the end is near. Now let's take the Civil War. This is just before the Civil War, they had a political division like they did now. And let's say how near was that end? Lincoln was elected and kind of at the highlight apex of the whole thing, and the Civil War ended 5 years later. So it took after 5 years ended, then we had the beginning of peace. So maybe we're looking at maybe 5 years or so from now if we use a law of correspondences there. So probably within 5 years from now, we're going to see different conditions. What that difference is going to be real interesting to see how it works out. I don't know how we would have a civil war like we had last time. I think the civil war we're having right now is on the astral plane rather than the physical, because dividing the states up for any physical civil war would be kind of awkward right now, unlike it was in the 1800s. So I think we're seeing a civil war played out on the astral plane, and I think the next 4 to 6 years will tell us how it's going to work out. He says humans in their progression have always been religious. He says even savages recognize a higher power. He says religions are united, though, in three basic concepts. One, in their teaching as to the nature of God and man. In other words, they all believe in the man is down here, God is up there somewhere in some other sphere. So they all have a rough idea of how that is. Details are a lot different. And he says there's quite a bit of similarity in all the religions and their symbolism. And third, he says, certain fundamental doctrines are the same in all religions. And I wrote about this, the principles of that religions have in common. I should have dug that up, but there's certain principles that all religions have in common, even though they're a lot different, like Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Buddhism. On the surface, they're a lot different, but they all believe in a higher power of some type, and they all believe the higher powers are benevolent, and they all believe in basically the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Almost every religion has some idea about that. They all believe that love is better than hate. They all believe in most of the 10 Commandments, of not murdering and not stealing, not committing adultery, and being honest. And they all believe in these same basic concepts. And since they believe in just being a good guy, most of them, that's what it boils down to. Be a good person. They all believe in that. It's amazing that they go to war with each other and they fight each other and they call each other evil and in league with the devil. And like a regular Christian calls a Mormon in league with the devil because he believes in a different concept of Jesus than he doesn't believe in the right Jesus, even though they both believe in the biblical Jesus. And the same thing with the Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists. A lot of Seventh-day Adventists believe that everybody else is in league with the devil because they don't worship on Saturday and they go to church on Sunday instead. So that's all part of the devil's plan, And so it's amazing how they disagree on one or two things, so they're in league with the devil. But as DK points out, the religions have a lot more in common than they have differences. And he points out that they are going to come together more in the future because that the things that they have in common that are good are more powerful in the end than their differences are. He says eventually we're going to be drawn into a one world religion. We're going to be drawn into one world religion and one world government. The question is not whether or not we're going to have a one world religion and one world government, which we'll all gravitate to eventually. The question is, what's it going to look like? If the Dark Brothers have control, it'll won't look very good. If the Brothers of Light have control, then it'll be a loose federation where everybody has complete free thought, but because of understanding, people will be one. Whereas the Dark Brothers want people to be one because they have a guy at the top that tells everybody what to think. So those are the two choices facing us. But as far as one world goes, that's where we're headed, like it or not. There's no way to avoid it. The path of the disciples to make sure that one world is going to be on the side of light rather than dark. He says theologies will disappear into the knowledge of God. Doctrines and dogmas will no longer be regarded as necessary. For faith will be based on experience, and authority will give place to personal appreciation of reality. In other words, what's going to bring the oneness will be just people will just understand things together. And things change. Like, look, 1,000 years ago, everybody believed slavery was normal and it was here to stay. And eventually we saw that was wrong and we moved to a higher level of understanding. Now almost everybody understands that slavery is undesirable, unnecessary, and we're better off without it. Just people agree on that because we understand it. But it wasn't that way a short time ago in our history. For most of our world history, everybody thought it was an essential evil, just something we had to make the most of. And people also, that caused separation into classes. So the slave class, they felt, was just the less intelligent people that needed to be told what to do anyway. So they made excuses for it. The authority of the soul, he says, will replace outward authority, and people will operate from understanding rather than blind faith. And that goes along with what we just said, is that, and this is one of the problems of that religion has always had, is that faith was blind. And the word of faith itself in the Greek doesn't imply blind faith. What implies blind faith is the word blasphemy. Blasphemy is to believe something with no logical foundation behind it. Whereas faith is to believe something because you've tested it. You have an idea. It's like the inventor gets a concept in his mind of something that's going to help humanity, and he believes he can make this manifest. So that's faith. And when he manifests it and actually makes it real, like Edison inventing the light bulb, then that's a manifestation of faith. And the manifestation of faith produced something that was real, unlike blasphemy that doesn't produce something that's real. Yeah.
Is there like a word root thing behind that, what you were saying there?
Yeah, I believe the word is priestess, if I remember right. P-R-I-S-T.
And that means blasphemy?
Oh, that means faith. Oh, yeah. And blasphemous is Greek for blasphemy. And that means to believe something without having a foundation for the belief, without having a logical reasoning behind it.
So they got it reversed.
Yeah, right. So when people, what people think of faith and the regular Christian religion is really blasphemy. You know, it's blasphemy to believe something without any logical reasoning behind it. Whereas true faith means it says right in Hebrews, the substance of things, the evidence of things hoped for, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Okay, and the substance, a more appropriate Greek translation is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And this is what the inventor does. And Edison, with the light bulb, he had the assurance of it in his mind because he visualized it. And then he began to get more and more evidence that he could actually manifest it. And then when he manifested, that was the manifestation of his faith. And he talks about this a little bit later, that scientists and inventors even that are actually use the principle of faith in their creations, which is kind of interesting. Okay. He says, see how much time we got, just about done. He says, we're passing through many spiritual ideas with many different beliefs and cults and slowly discerning the true from the false. So he says, even these cults are good in the long run because they tell us what doesn't work. And so we're by all these different religions, all these different thought processes going on are teaching humanity what works and what doesn't work. It says two main lines of thought are emerging. One doomed eventually to die out, and the other to strengthen and grow, and in its turn give birth that for us will be the ultimate formulation of truth, which will suffice for the next age, the Aquarian age, and carry man to the high pinnacle of the temple, to the mount of initiation. And he says these two lines of thought, the first line of thought are the hangers-on, the old-time religious ideas, all the religions of the past are now holding on to all their ideas. And DK says to them is a task of defining the old truths so that the mind of the race will be clarified and be able to see the non-essentials, and the essentials will be recognized for what they are. Okay? So the old-time religions and the extremely religious people of the past, what they're holding on to will illustrate to us what the essentials are that we can keep. Not everything in the religions of the past are bad. A lot of good things in them, but a lot of things that we need to let go of. So they're illustrating to us what we need to let go of and what we need to keep. And the new generation that pops up after each new generation sees several things that they feel the generation needs to let go of, and that so we slowly make some progress. Now the second group will be seekers who belong to no church or religion, but just accept truth wherever it may be found. And that's pretty much people in this group. We're not members of any religion or don't embrace one over another. What we're looking for is just truth wherever it may be found. And it says these people will recognize each other. They accord equal devotion to spiritual leaders of all races. They use other people's Bibles with equal freedom. They form the subjective background of the new world. They constitute the spiritual nucleus of the coming world religion. They are the unifying principle which will eventually save the world. And he calls these people the group savior. And he says, imagine how powerful Christ was as a savior. He says, imagine a whole group of Christ, of Jesus's working to save the world. And that will be this type of person. He's not a member of any particular religion or group. He can go to any religion and use their Bible and teach them out of their own Bibles. And we can use a Green Jehovah's Witness Bible. We can use a Quran. We can use Buddhist teachings. We can quote Confucius, and we'll use truth wherever we find it and teach out of there. But you go to a staunch religious group, and they will have their materials. They will only teach out of their materials. And if you go to a Sunday school class and you quote something from a book they haven't heard of before, they'll look at you kind of funny, you know.
AJ,
Yeah.
what pages does this start on?
We're around 328 in the White Magic book right now.
Okay.
Just to give you a reference here. Okay, we're any comments or questions on that? Curtis and I, in the past, we would sometimes, Curtis especially enjoyed doing this. He liked to go to Sunday school in the Mormon church, since that's our background, and then quote the teacher something that kind of threw him for a loop. You want to talk about one of those experiences, Curtis? Is he still here?
Yeah, present and accounted for. Yeah, like I'd ask him about the plan of salvation, how it really worked, how I'd quote Joseph Smith saying that this eternal, we need to talk about eternal lives, and get him into tell him that Joseph Smith believed in reincarnation.
Yeah, yeah, that really throws them for a loop, all right.
Yeah, and they couldn't really defend it. You know, how does it work that when you die, say you're 14 years old and you die and you want to come back and have a full life's experience, who's going to stop you? If the number one principle of heaven is free agency, and I'm an individual soul and I'm out of a body and I want to go back into a body, who's going to stop me? And they had no answer to that, because otherwise it would make God look like a dictator.
Wait, there was no answer to that? I mean, they couldn't make up some. I mean, I could make up an answer to that that's at least halfway plausible. Like there's a barrier in heaven, and it just exists, and you're here, and can't go back out.
Well,
like a frisbee, you get it up on the roof, it can't come back down.
Yeah, but a Mormon has to answer it according to what he's been taught.
Oh, so they now have the creative thinking.
No, yeah, they they're in a certain mindset. They got to answer within the parameters of what's approved.
Yeah, I see. They believe that when the leaders speak, the thinking has been done, and for them to think outside of the parameters of essential Mormonism is basically a sin, and that's what the blasphemy is. Half of their beliefs are unfounded. They just believe what they've been parroted to believe.
So what did they do after you answered them? Or after they didn't have an answer?
When they had no answer?
Yeah, what happened after that?
It was checkmate. I say, well, then maybe you're open to a little greater light and truth. And now I'll stick with what I got. Well, why would you want to do that if there's something greater out there? See, Joe was writing materials. He had written the literal gathering of Israel, which really opened my eyes and would have opened their eyes. He wrote Eternal Progression, which got me in trouble with the authorities because it showed that there's always progression from kingdom to kingdom. You don't just get stuck in a kingdom and can't move to the next kingdom. So I'd say, well, here in the Doctrine and Covenants, it says that there are kingdoms above the celestial. What kingdoms do you think those are? And of course, to them, the celestial is the highest of the high, and you can go no higher. So I'd say, well, either you want to go forward in your progressive thinking or you want to stay where you're at and stagnate. What's it going to be? You want to go forward, yes or no?
And meanwhile, the guy that's sitting next to Curtis in Sunday school kind of moves away.
Well, when I got executed,
that answer was always, well, we don't understand what all that means. It'll all get worked out when we get to the other side.
Yeah, that's right. That's their
really typical response.
Yeah, God will sort everything out. Don't worry about it now.
Yeah, you're not supposed to question the mysteries.
You only need to know what the prophet told you. That's all.
Yeah.
Well,
I was contemplating on something earlier in the week about how we can spread JJ's teachings to more of the world. Basically, right now, JJ's fan club is basically a lot of ex-Mormons. And it's like, if we want to spread it out, we have to do something that publicists talk about, like a comedian. To be more known to the public, he's got to have a shtick, okay? And it's like some, little things like maybe we got to get JJ a bell that he can ring, and we got to give him a background. So like, if I tune into his latest video and I see the same background, the photograph in the background of the
Eye
from
of God.
the nebula or whatever. It's like, you know, give him a green background so we can put his image on other backgrounds, you know, make videos. It's like, you know, we got to do this. We have to produce some kind of, like, we have to use publicity. We have to use you know, promotional techniques. This is showbiz. If you want to get out to the whole public, you got to be a showbiz character. So we have to develop something that makes you stand apart, you know, that makes you bigger than life, that makes you extraordinary. And it's like the same background that, you know, we have to come up with something. It's like what the comedians call a shtick. This is your thing. And it's like, you know, so it's just something to think about.
Yeah.
Maybe JJ needs a little bell. Everybody send JJ a bell.
Yeah, right. Okay. Any other comments or questions before we move on? I'd say
Well,
out of the
I had
yeah.
a little comment, and that is the new religion, I think, is going to be colored by the effects of business. And business has to do also in the seventh ray with business and social expansion. That's why network marketing was so popular in the 80s and 90s and still to a small extent today, because people had to learn, in spite of their religious differences, they had to learn to work together and to cooperate if they wanted to succeed. So, you know, the whole idea of cooperation through groups in business and even Facebook, as diverse as it is, still provides a platform for social expression and social expansion, which was never available to us 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. So I think business is going to provide a strong medium for this next step in evolution to show itself and manifest.
Yeah, I think network marketing was a step in the seventh ray business model that is evolving. Matter of fact, network marketing is really big in other countries outside the United States. My son works for a network marketing company in Thailand. He says it's really big there in Thailand, for instance, but a lot bigger than the United States. And so it's kind of started here, spread throughout the world, and now it's kind of been replaced by more of a cooperative type. We're headed more toward where business is more cooperative. And so I think that's all part of evolution, even though a lot of people are annoyed with all the people that contacted them through network marketing. It was still a step in involving people in social business, kind of like you're saying there.
You're right.
Okay, any other comments or questions before we wrap it up? Okay, my friends, we will see you next week. I was thinking maybe we'll do 10 in the morning next week. Did everybody, was that a time everybody liked? Kind of switch around, maybe 10 in the morning, 10 in the evening, 2 p.m. Try to get all the time zones involved one time or another.
Well, I think 10 in the morning, 11 in the morning would suit anyone in any time zone.
Yeah, or maybe 11 in the morning. That'll give me time to go through my materials before I give the class.
Some people might have to work. I'm currently unemployed, so that's okay. But
Yeah.
Oh, we don't work on Sunday, do we?
yeah,
You know, they put you to death in the old days for working on Sabbath there, Joshua.
my Sabbath is different. I was always working on Sunday.
Could you imagine being put to death for working on the Sabbath? Well, that was pretty strict.
Well, they were trying to teach you a lesson, you know, give you an rest because you didn't learn to rest when you were here on Earth. You know?
I guess so. That was pretty darn strict. But whatever the case, fortunately, we're playing it a lot looser in this age and have a lot more freedoms.
Well, if they caught you stealing, they'd cut your hand off.
Well, they still do that in the Middle East.
I know.
Yeah, if you see somebody without a hand, they probably were a thief.